Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Yuot. It's Monday, April 25th. This is Africa 54.
An explosion at an illegal Nigerian oil refinery kills over 100 people. Kenya plans a state funeral for former President Mwai Kibaki. Top U.S. diplomats visit Kyiv to meet with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy. These stories and much more on today's Africa 54.
We'll have those stories in a moment, but first we begin in Sudan, where at least 168 people have been killed and 98 injured in tribal clashes in the western Darfur region. Violence erupted Friday in Kyiv between Arab nomads and Masalit farmers after an individual altercation, according to several non-governmental organizations. Western Darfur is home to thousands of people who are displaced in a conflict that began in the early 2000s, which saw the government put down armed rebels with help from nomadic Arab militias known as the Janjaweed. Some 2.5 million people were displaced in the violence and 300,000 were killed. For more insight on the violence in Darfur, Yahya Mohammed Asman joins me live via phone from Kampala, Uganda. He is a Sudanese activist and human rights defender. Yahya, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
So what prompted this latest wave of violence in Darfur?
Let us go back to 2000, whereby the government itself, to fight the rebels, they created this Janjaweed militias, whereby it well defined that the Janjaweed terminology, it is a devil on the back of a horse with a Kalashnikov. The government supported actually recruiting those Arab nomads, and they promised them an empty land. Since we have experienced a silent genocide until the removal of Omar al-Bashir, who's indicted by the International Criminal Court, as well as his other colleagues or his other staff. The conflict is very clear since the beginning. It was between an Arab nomads called Janjaweed, mainly came from Niger, Chad, Central Africa, and Cameroon. They have offices to recruit those Arabs and to support the Sudanese government in expansion of Arabization and expense of the African indigenous tribes. Not Masalit alone, but the entire Darfurians.
How about the group now tasked with the Juba peace agreement? How have they reacted to this? Have they said anything to try to quell this crisis?
This is where the disappointment actually, whereby Darfurians and people in Darfur community capitalize on those who picked arms against the government. And then recently they joined the government through Juba peace agreement. Everybody's shocked, everybody's surprised that they have 3 representatives at the National Transitional Supreme Council, and they are completely silent. Plus, the governor of Darfur today is part of the rebel forces, Minni al-Kuminawi. Unfortunately, none of them can speak out loudly to condemn this continued genocide. We call it silent genocide. And I can tell you, welcome back to the international community disappointment again, where no one at the international community level condemned or speak out or to compare what is happening now in Darfur by what is happening in Ukraine, whereby the Ukrainian refugees receive warmly by cell phones and all things.
Yeah,
and those
yeah.
people are scattered in a panic.
We'll follow up with you on this, and we'll be looking out to see what the combination of the military government in Sudan and the civilian is going to do about this crisis. Definitely. Yahya, thank you very much. Yahya Muhammad Osman is a Sudanese activist and human rights defender speaking to us on the phone from Kampala, Uganda. Burned bodies littered the ground after an explosion at an illegal Nigerian oil refinery between the southern oil states of Rivers and Imo, 30 kilometers away from the Imo state capital, Owerri. Paul Ndiho has more.
Nigerian Emergency Services says that the death toll from an explosion at an illegal refinery in southern Nigeria has risen to at least 110. The blast occurred later Friday at an illegal site. A relative of some victims expressed his anguish.
Very sad, because I carried the knife from childhood. Their father died when he was not of 30 years. When I joined the Nigerian army, was when they bought them newly. So by today, I'm weeping because of these two young guys.
Another Nigerian says life in his region of Nigeria is hopeless.
Life is so poor. Life is too painful here, and everybody, you can see here, both women, children, and the youth, they resort to any means to survive.
The Commissioner for Environment of Imo State, Cyril Duru, said mass burials would be necessary. However, it was not possible to identify the dead due to the conditions of the bodies after the blast.
We've agreed with the chairman of the local government so they can do mass burial, because obviously cannot identify the bodies. They're badly charred. You know, then the next thing will be to fumigate the area so that to stop, possibly anything, diseases, outbreak of diseases around this vicinity.
Burnt out vehicles and jerrycans used to scoop up stolen crude and petroleum products littered the scene of the carnage. The disaster is the latest to hit oil-rich Nigeria in recent years. Pipeline fires are commonplace in Nigeria because of poor maintenance, and thieves are vandalizing pipelines to siphon off petrol and sell it on the black market.
Our minds are burning, we are bleeding. And as such, I wouldn't know what will be the outcome tomorrow. Because as I speak, the youths are gathering themselves. They are trying to meet. At the end, they might come up with something.
Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari described the incident as a catastrophe and a national disaster. Government officials estimate that Nigeria, Africa's biggest oil producer and exporter, loses an average of 200,000 barrels of oil per day, more than 10% of its production to stolen oil. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
15 soldiers and 6 civilians were killed on Sunday in attacks in Mali and Burkina Faso. Mali's military says suicide bombers drove cars packed with explosives into 3 military camps in central Mali before dawn. 6 were killed and 15 wounded at the Sevare camp, and 5 were wounded at 2 other locations. Across the border in northern Burkina Faso, simultaneous attacks on military detachments in Gaskinde and Pobemengao early Sunday killed 9 soldiers and killed civilians, including 2 who the military say were members of the armed self-defense group. Kenya's Interior Minister Fred Matiang'i says the government is planning a state funeral on Friday for former President Mwai Kibaki, who led the East African nation for more than a decade. Kibaki, who died Friday at 90, served as the country's 3rd president from December 2002 to April 2013, taking over from the authoritarian rule of Daniel Arap Moi. Kibaki, whose political career dates back to the birth of independent Kenya, is to be buried Saturday at his home in Othaya in the Nyeri Highlands. The burial ceremony will be preceded by a funeral service at the Nyayo National Stadium in Nairobi, and his body will lie in state at Kenya's parliament from Monday through Wednesday to allow citizens to pay their respects. Hundreds of Kenyans lined up on Monday in Nairobi to pay their last respects to former President Mwai Kibaki. Mohamed Yusuf spoke to some of them outside Kenya's parliament.
Kenyans have come out in large numbers to pay their last respect to departed President Mwai Kibaki. Kibaki served as president between 2002 and 2013. His election win in 2002 brought an end to 4 decades of one-party rule in Kenya.
My name is Wagunda. I remember President Kibaki much about infrastructure and free primary education. We love him. He was a strong president.
My name is Naomi Kimtai.
Naomi, what do you have come to pay your last respect?
I've come to pay the last respect for our hero. He's our president. He was the former president. We loved him so much, and he gave us a free education. I enjoyed that free education from primary school. I finished. Also, the infrastructure and the system of how the government was ruled, it was great, and I really thank him for that. Yeah, he's a hero.
Okay, Kibaki was a nice person to our country, Kenya. So, like, I would like to come and pay my last respect to her. Yeah, to him.
The late president will be buried on Saturday. Mohammed Yusuf for VOA News, Nairobi.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame made his first visit to Uganda in 4 years Sunday as the relationship between the two East African nations improves following long simmering tensions. The Rwanda Public Broadcasting Agency says Kagame met with President Yoweri Museveni and he attended the 48th birthday party of Museveni's powerful son Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who has been instrumental in the rapprochement between the two neighbors. Kainerugaba previously held talks with Kagame that led to a reopening of the land border in January after 3 years of closure. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Africa 54's new Facebook address is facebook.com/VOA Africa. Be sure to join us Tuesday for Linomudu's latest health report, still to come on Africa 54. Top U.S. diplomats visit Kyiv for face-to-face talks with the Ukrainian president. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
U.S. diplomats are expected to start returning to Ukraine this week, and the U.S. is sending more military aid to help Ukraine's war effort against Russia, making the first official U.S. visit to Ukraine since Russia invaded 2 months ago. Washington's top diplomat and its defense secretary pledged additional military aid, including advanced weapons. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the media Sunday in Poland after visiting Kyiv along with U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin that while Russia is trying to brutalize parts of Ukraine, Ukrainians are standing strong, and they're doing that with the support that we have coordinated. Blinken and Austin met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and other officials for about 3 hours. Secretary Blinken explained his visit to Kyiv.
We are back. The reason we're back is because of you, because of the extraordinary courage, leadership, and success that you've had in pushing back this horrific Russian aggression, and we're honored to be here. President Biden felt strongly that we should find the earliest opportunity just to show in Kyiv our support, but also to continue in detail the very important conversations that we've been having with all of your colleagues on the agenda that you cited. But let me just say at the outset, what a pleasure it is to see you in person. We've gotten used to seeing you on video around the world, but it's good to see you in person.
U.S. officials say the cabinet secretaries pledged new assistance worth $713 million for Zelensky's government and other countries in the region that are fearful of further Russian aggression. Returning U.S. diplomats will go first to the western city of Lviv and then eventually to Kyiv, a process that Blinken says could take several weeks. Continued Russian attacks came against the backdrop of Easter Sunday in Orthodox Christianity. VOA's Arasha Rabasadi has more.
Orthodox Christians attend Easter services in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. A day typically filled with joy is instead somber with unrelenting attacks from Russia. The country's president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, had announced the visit to Kyiv by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and gave a preview of what was to be discussed.
We will be discussing the list of weapons we need and the time frame for delivery. Let me stress once again, throughout this past week, signals, steps, terms, numbers. I'm talking about weapons supplied by the United States. Everything has improved, and we are grateful, and we are awaiting it very eagerly.
President Zelenskyy again called for U.S. President Joe Biden to visit his embattled nation when the security situation improves.
America is clearly, the leader of free world, and of course we expect, three main things with our close ally and close partner, which is the United States, is heavy weapons, it's sanctions on Russia, and of course financial aid.
Kravchuk added that heavy offensive weapons would help liberate besieged Ukrainian cities like Mariupol. There, residents lay to rest their relatives and neighbors. With no money for funerals, they carry bodies by hand and bury them in courtyards. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry on Sunday released video of an unspecified missile launch while a representative described what he called successful strikes from high-precision ground-based missiles. Russia continues calling its war a special military operation and denies targeting civilians. Drone footage from the city of Chernihiv tells a different story, with residential buildings destroyed. Cleanup efforts have been underway there since Russian soldiers left the city earlier this month. The believed initial purpose of the Kremlin's invasion, the capture of Ukraine's capital, seems stuck in the mud.
Kyiv is beyond their means. They simply can't seize Kyiv. They can't replace the Zelenskyy government. I think they're still looking for opportunities to figure out what their goals are. They're sort of making it up as they go along. Putin is trying to assess what might be possible. He's looking for opportunities, and he'll grab the first good one available. Right now, there don't seem to be many good opportunities for Vladimir Putin.
Sunday, from a balcony in Vatican City, Pope Francis again called for peace in Ukraine, lamenting war on these, the holiest days for Christians. While in the safety of Moscow's Savior Cathedral, Russian President Vladimir Putin attended Mass. The Russian Orthodox Church conducted the service. Its head, Patriarch Kirill, has strongly backed the invasion of Ukraine. But in Kyiv, it was a different scene as worshippers at St. Michael's Golden-Domed Monastery prayed for an end to war, with some worshippers claiming to have heard air raid sirens at the end of Mass. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
The African Union Commission Chief Moussa Faki Mahamat is among world leaders who have sent congratulatory messages to French President Emmanuel Macron on his re-election. In his Twitter message, Mahamat said he hoped to continue building mutually beneficial relations between Africa and France. Macron, who defeated Marine Le Pen at the polls, is the first French president in 2 decades to win a second term. The inspiration for Africa's Great Green Wall project to plant trees across the continent to hold back the Sahara Desert came partly from Burkina Faso. While the project faces challenges and criticism, it still has champions who are teaching the next generation the importance of planting trees. Henry Wilkins reports from Burkina Faso.
In the arid savannah of Burkina Faso's countryside, for decades, local people have understood the importance of planting trees to protect their livelihoods and hold back the encroaching desert. Few more so than El Hadji Salifou Ouedraogo, who has run a business planting and nurturing the famous baobab trees for more than 40 years.
At the beginning, it was mangoes that I produced, but I realized very quickly that many people already did that. So, having baobab at home and having noticed that people come to the house all the time to ask for the baobab leaves for food, I thought to myself, why not produce it in large numbers? It would help people a lot.
The baobab tree's fruits, leaves and bark are used by some Burkinabe people as an important food source and for medicinal purposes. But Thomas Sankara, the country's president from 1983 to 1987 and a national hero for many in Burkina Faso, envisioned planting the baobab and all kinds of trees across the continent. He once said, "Step by step, tree by tree, we'll create this great park of 10 million trees." Some say Sankara was the inspiration for the UN and World Bank-funded Great Green Wall, a projected 8,000-kilometre-long band of trees stretching across the southern edge of the Sahara Desert from the east of Africa to the west. Backers claim it will also help fight the effects of climate change, drought, famine, conflict and migration. But critics say after 15 years the project is only 4% complete, with just 10 years left before its completion deadline.
I can see three different kinds of problems. One from the social point of view, obviously from the implementation point of view, and then the ecological consequences and feasibility. Territory that is going to be planted with trees is currently a conflict area, either with traditional military conflicts or with terrorism.
But non-profit groups say the project is making gains and uniting communities.
So we have been working on the ground, mostly with rural communities, rehabilitating land and forest, also empowering local communities to get involved into the economic system. So we really believe that the Great Green Wall is one of the solutions for the Sahel region.
Ouedraogo's son, who is taking on the family business, believes tree planting is essential for the future too.
I accompany my father on all possible terrains, and he tells me how to take care of the trees, and particularly the baobabs, which are a symbol of Africa.
He also said it's important to save nature because, in his words, saving nature is saving the life of man. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Southwest Burkina Faso.
An aid group in Nigeria is helping hundreds of women living with disabilities to become their own bosses by learning how to make crafts and sell them. The group recently held a trade fair to showcase the products. Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja.
Rabi Mustafa has mastered the art of soap making. Stirring and pouring the liquid soap into bottles, she brands them and prepares them for distribution. Mustafa earns a weekly income from her business, but as a physically disabled woman, life has been tough.
Just see my sister, my brother is going to...
When I saw my sisters and brothers going to school, I asked my parents, "Why don't you want to put me in school?" But they said, "No, you can't go to school." That made me cry a lot.
Despite the stigma, Mustafa managed to get an education. And now, making liquid soap helps her pay for her children's schooling.
Anytime I want money...
Once I take out some money to buy chemicals for my soaps, then I use the rest to pay for my children's school fees.
An estimated 30 million people in Nigeria are living with disabilities. They are among the country's poorest because of the stigma and marginalization they suffer. Advocates say women and girls face even more difficulties than their male counterparts. The Nigerian non-profit Disability Rights Advocacy Center, or DRAC, is trying to address that problem by teaching disabled women craft making, including sewing, soap and bead making, and catering. The non-profit recently hosted a trade fair for disabled women to display their products to more customers. Irene Patrick Ogbogo is the founder of the non-profit.
Because of the stigma that is associated with disability, most times people do not patronize them. And so we looked at all of this and felt, okay, how about also I'm helping them break that barrier of patronage. And that's why we came up with this idea of having we call it the Abuja Inclusion Fair.
The Inclusion Trade Fair was the first for disabled Nigerians and won praise from disability activist groups.
And we will do more as the funds are made available so that person with disability in Nigeria can have a sense of belonging. And then they shift from the old narratives.
Honor Peters was among those attending the fair.
I bought a bead, a neck bead, and it's really nice, very well made, looked really pretty. I came to do something else in the market and I saw them.
As for Mustafa, she will continue making her soaps, hoping for the next big opportunity. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our new Facebook page, facebook.com/VOA Africa. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.
Ukraine and Russia are both major agricultural producers. 30% of the world's wheat exports typically come from the Black Sea region, as does 20% of the world's corn and 75% of sunflower oil. Russian missiles and bombs have damaged and destroyed Ukrainian airports, rail lines, train stations, and highways that are critical for exporting wheat, corn, and other commodities. These actions by Russia are creating a food crisis in Ukraine and well beyond Ukraine's borders. To end this humanitarian catastrophe is through a durable ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukrainian territory. Vladimir Putin started this war. He created this global